So I did not like Texas. It took me a really long time. I did not like it. So I got there and it was great. You know, we arrived, and we were very well taken care of, and we went and had interviews and dinner and kind of got to know a little bit about it. At the time, we came in with about 1.5 million missionaries, so usually I would just have everybody stay in the mission home, but there was not enough room at the mission home, so they were like, okay, you're going to go stay with these random members in a ward, and in the ward. So we went over there and they were like, okay, and so we took over one of their girls' bedrooms. I felt really bad because we were sleeping in this girl's bed. I don't know where she slept, and we both forgot all of our pajamas because we didn't have our suitcases. We just kind of picked stuff out, and the girl I was with that was in my MTC district, she's like, I didn't bring any pajamas. I was like, I didn't bring any either. So we slept in our skirts. It was great. It looked really good the next day. But we went to that meeting the next day, and so we were getting our trainers, and it was so exciting. We were so excited. And my last name is Lillenquist, and we were, everybody was introducing themselves, and all of a sudden this girl gets up and she's like, hey, my name is Sister Quist. And I looked over at one of the sisters from my district and I said, oh my gosh, if this happens. And she was like, oh my gosh. And we were companions. So it was Lillenquist and Quist for a while. And my mission president said, this just proves that God has a sense of humor because he put us together. So it was Quist and Lilquist for a while. And I really struggled the first few weeks. I did really well because I was just so excited to be there. It was really hot and really humid because it was the end of August. And I sweat a lot, and it was great. The first door I ever knocked got slammed in my face. That was awesome. But Texas, it took me a while. I have an issue with arrogance and cocky people, and a lot of the people in Texas, especially when you claim to know about Jesus, do not like that. They know their stuff. They know who it is. But also on the flip side, I found more as time went on that became to be a really good thing. That people down there just love the Savior, and they love his gospel, and they're not afraid to share it. And it's really cool. I really appreciated them. So it took me a little bit. It was too hot. I don't like hot. I'm pretty sure I came out of the womb saying if I go on a mission, I just don't want to go somewhere hot. And so I didn't really like that. But once I stopped thinking about how hot it was, and once I just kind of got used to it, I came to love it. And now I love it a lot. And I sometimes claim to be raised in the South, even though that's not true. If there was a geographic name, we would be the Texas Houston North Mission. So we end about 4 miles north of downtown Houston. So we get the projects. It's awesome. I love it. And then we go about 2 hours north to a place called Crockett, where there's a branch of 30 members. And then we go, it's mostly north and west. So we have a place called Katy, which is full of really, really, really wealthy people that do oil and gas. And then there's Sealy, which is another branch in the middle of nowhere. And then we also have the university. We have Texas A&M up there, and it's in a city called College Station. And College Station is like the celestial area of the mission. And everybody wants to go to College Station. And I really wanted to go to college, and I didn't make it, which was kind of sad in my life. But so we have the temple. My first person president had us go, we went as a district every 6 weeks. The mission president that's there now has said that we can go. I can't remember if it's you can only go once to transfer, but I don't think that there's that restriction. But they ask that you take people with you. So less actives and working to get with them to the temple or recent converts, but making it more of a missionary opportunity to go to the temple instead of just me going to the temple. And most of the members that live in Houston are what we call transplants. So most of them are from other places. A lot of them are not Houston Texans. I was expecting to go down there and everybody was going to speak in Southern accents and I was going to get grits and gravy and chicken. And I did not have that happen. There's a lot of members from Utah, but there's also a lot of members that are just from the Houston area. It's kind of a melting pot. And when I say kind of, I mean really a melting pot. There's Texans thrown in there. Once you get into the more rural areas is when you start, seeing the things, and people feed you squirrels. One of the elders said he ate a squirrel for dinner. Ew. But the people are very kind. Most of the mission and most of the areas are in a city called Spring, which is just north and is a suburb of Houston. And so like the Spring area, there's the Spring zone and the Houston North zone and the Klein zone, which is where the temple is. And that has most of the areas in the mission. So all of the rural areas, there's honestly probably less than a dozen, but there are so many in these wards, because a lot of the time when people come to Houston, they draw a map around, or they draw a circle around the temple and say, I want a house in here, so that they can be close to the temple. And the members are really kind. I really love them. They're very strong. They take care of the missionaries. There's always people that don't feed you, and there's always people that don't like you, but you'll find that anywhere. They are just very solid. I loved working with the youth. The youth are fabulous. The high schools are very kind of scary. There's a lot of stuff that goes on there. There's a lot of, they have a lot of pornography issues. They have a lot of sexual issues, and these kids are just rock solid, and they have to be, and they are, and they're so cool. And the mission has English and Spanish. So it's kind of two separate missions, kind of. Not really, because there are times when you'll have, like I said, a Spanish district in your zone, but a lot of the times they have separate Spanish and English zones. So the only time you really see the Spanish missionaries is if you're giving them referrals, or if they magically happen to be in your zone, or zone conferences or things. I served in 5 areas. Another story. So growing up, my best friend lived down the street from me. Her name was Liz. She was an only child, and her dad worked at the University of Utah. And so growing up, we would always hang out together. And then when I was about 14, I believe, her dad got transferred to Texas A&M. So I got my call, and I saw that College Station was in my mission. And I had visited her one time. I had spent a week down there. And so I was convinced that I was getting sent down there to teach them. And one of the most humbling things is I never went up there. I was sure that that's why the Lord wanted me there. But I realized that he had so many much bigger things that he wanted to teach me than what I thought he was going to teach me. So I served in 5 different areas. I started off in a place called Oak Ridge, which is right across the street right across the freeway, literally, from a place called the Woodlands, which is basically the wealthiest, most beautiful, planned community of a city where all of the oil and gas people live. So that was really interesting, because we would have them on one side of the freeway, and then literally across the tracks on the other side of the freeway was this super ghetto place where, everybody was living in shacks and RVs, and there were drug issues, and the bishop wouldn't let us go there after it got dark. So that was really interesting. I then got transferred to a place called Westfield, which was it was closer to the mission office, but it was in more of a sketchy area. And I was in a trio there. I was only there for 6 weeks. And then I went to a place called the Windrose Ward, not Klein yet. I went to the Windrose Ward, and that was a really hard ward. I was there for about a transfer and a half, and then another ward got split in the zone, and they took the elders out of that ward and put them in our ward and put us in this new ward. And so my companion and I opened this new area for sisters. I was there for 6 months, and it was great, and we taught family, and it was awesome. And then I got transferred to a place called Old Oaks, which is down almost to the ghetto, but not quite. There are a couple of areas that are in the 3rd ward and the 5th ward are about as bad as it gets in the U.S. But we were just on the border of that. So we had a little bit of that, but it was, if you had asked the people down in those wards, they would be like, that's nothing, because they have all the stuff farther south. So yeah, that's where I served. Bluebell ice cream is manna from heaven, and it is delicious. And the Bluebell factory is in our mission. So you can go there on P Day if you get someone to drive you there. It's just this ice cream, and I don't know why it's so good, but it is. It's just really, really good. There are no sidewalks anywhere, and there are no shoulders on the roads. And I don't care what you say, Houston drivers are the worst in the entire world. They just kind of drive like they're off in their own little world, and they just move over and they speed up and they slow down, and I don't understand them at all. So we have one of the largest car fleets in the world. So there are very few biking areas, because a lot of the areas are bigger, I think, and because it's super sketchy, because there are no shoulders to bike, which I did for 6 months, and it was a struggle. It was really hard, but I did love biking. I had like a Saul Paul conversion experience to biking as a missionary, because I thought it was the stupidest thing in the world, because I was in a skirt, and I was all sweaty and gross and nasty. But once I actually was on a bike, I was sweaty and gross and nasty. But if you bike all day long and you don't meet a single person, you still feel really accomplished, because you biked like 12 miles and it was 1.5 million degrees. It's easier to talk to people. I mean, we stopped and talked to people on our bikes all the time. And I had like this I felt more connected to the world because I wasn't in a box all the time. So I actually loved biking, but there's so many cars, which is really nice and is a blessing, except for miles, because you only get to drive a certain amount of miles, and that's kind of the worst thing in the world. You might gain weight if you're not careful, because it's the South and the food is really good. Barbecue is great. My favorite, they have a place called Rudy's, which everybody usually loves, unless you're like a hipster, and then you don't like Rudy's because it's too mainstream. But my favorite were these little hole-in-the-wall barbecue restaurants. They were great. There's one by the Spring Steak Center on Hannah Road, where it's literally a little shack in front of these people's houses, and it's called Country Time Barbecue, and it is so good. But you go in there and there's plastic tables and it smells really weird, but it is so, so good. So you'll get barbecue. I was kind of expecting to get all kinds of Southern food. I didn't. I think it was mostly because I was in the city. But the farther out you go, the more excellent food you get. I know that the Spanish missionaries got good food, and they also got really weird food. I ate menudo once, which is cow intestine soup. It wasn't very good. It just was weird. It tasted all right, I think, but it was just really weird. And everybody will give you water all the time. That is one of the ways to get in someone's house. If they're like, no, I don't want to talk to you, well, do you have some water? And honestly, people will, especially if you're out during the summer, people will stop you, or people will offer you water. Even if they don't let you in, they will say, here, do you want some water? And people are usually really nice about when you're talking to them too. I got really frustrated with some people, because they're very strong in their own faith. So some people would be very kind. Some people would say, I really appreciate what you're doing, because they do a lot of the same thing. There's these, mega churches. They have giant churches everywhere. In each of my areas, I had at least one mega church. And they hold, it's like not stadium size, but they're giant auditoriums. And so we would go, a lot of the people we would talk to would go to these churches, but they were just huge. And everybody has their own little church that they go to, but people are usually very kind. When they're not kind, they're not. But I found that people were willing to talk to us. Also, I'm a girl, so that probably was a lot easier. I think I heard that the elders got stuff thrown at them and got cussed out, but they were always really nice to us. So it was great. Sometimes you get really disappointed about stateside missions, and sometimes you are going to hear somebody who gets called to Romania or Berlin or Madagascar, and you're going to think to yourself, I thought to myself that I wasn't capable, that was what they were telling me, was I wasn't good enough to go overseas, that, I got stuck going to the armpit of the world, which Houston's kind of the armpit of the world. it's kind of gross. It's kind of smelly. But I fully believe that that stateside missions have so many blessings that don't come to foreign missionaries, The culture shock is so much easier to go through. It's not, I'm in a completely different country. It's just, I'm in a different part of the country. There are still things that are familiar that you can hold on to. And one of the greatest blessings is that I've been home a little less than a year, and I have already been back, and I will be going back soon in a month or so. That this doesn't have to be the last time you see these people, that you don't have to save up $10 bajillion to go back and visit these people that you love. You can go back, you can stay in touch with them so well. They all have social media, they all have phones, things that may be expensive or may not exist so well in other countries. I want to promise you that it really is not the place that matters. Everybody always says that, but there are people and places and things that the Lord has made especially for you. It's like a little present, like a little gift or something, that He has formulated especially for you. And I promise you that where you're going is going to be so much better than anybody else or anybody else's call, because that's their gift and this one is yours. And stateside's the best. Plus, you don't have to spend 72 hours on a plane and have jet lag, because that's awesome. So yeah. There's all of the seasons. Humidity, my trainer was from Mesa. So she put it this way. Mesa's like being in an oven, and Houston's like being in a crock pot. So the summer was really, really hot. I felt like I was being suffocated all the time. I couldn't escape. And honestly, the best advice my mission president gave me was to not think about it. And I remember he said it to me, and I thought to myself, how in the world do I not think about it? Because it's literally everywhere. But I found that it would be like, oh, it's hot. And I'd be like, no, go away, thought. It honestly got better when I didn't think about it and when I didn't let it bother me. The rainstorms are insane. We have a rainstorm here, and it's great, there's lots of thunder and lightning. But especially during the spring and the fall, they have thunderstorms where you can't see 10 feet in front of you because it's that thick. And the raindrops are giant, and they come out of nowhere. It's insane. Also, it does get cold. Somebody was saying, oh no, it doesn't. It gets cold. And it's humid cold. So it's really hard to put on enough layers to feel warm because it penetrates your coat. You can't just put on a coat and be like, oh look, I'm blocking out the cold. It gets pretty cold. But it's not like snow, but it's cold. But that's the weather. There's also tornadoes sometimes. I didn't get one. Some of the sisters and Katie had to hide in a bathtub one time because there was a tornado warning. Also, I know this is terrible. I really wanted there to be a hurricane because they got to do a lot of service and they got to talk to a lot of people that they wouldn't usually get to talk to, but there wasn't a hurricane when I was there. But that is the thing. I know that they had a tropical storm recently and the South Mission got hit really badly. So they did a lot of service. My mission didn't have, they were like, we're on standby, but they don't really need our help. It was just, they got a lot of rain and the power went out and everybody's food in their fridge went bad. So I got lots of Facebook statuses about having to clean out the fridge. It was funny. I had just been transferred to an area. The anxiety and depression was really bad. I was really struggling. And one night we went to a member's house. They were seminary teachers and they had a party for all of their seminary kids and for a couple of non-members. And I remember being there. I was really anxious. I was around this new group of people. I have kind of social anxiety almost. And I tend to talk a lot and really loud and get kind of immature. And I realize now looking back at it that I wasn't behaving exactly like a missionary should, but it's not like I was insane either. So we went home. It was just really bad. And we woke up the next morning and I got a call from the mission president. And he said, I just got some news from some members that I wanted to talk to you about. And he said that a member had written him, and we found out very quickly that it was the member that we had visited the night before and that they were talking about me. And it was very specific things that they felt that I had done wrong. And so I was really upset. I said, you know what, the first thing we need to do is go apologize. I feel terrible about this. I don't want to have this ruin the work in this ward. And just after that, the ward mission leader called and said, can I have you come over and talk to me? And so we went over, and he printed out this email. It was a full page. And it was the meanest things anybody has ever said about me in my entire life. He said I was arrogant. He said that I was immature. He said that I was talking poorly about the church or about people joining the church. He said that I drove the spirit away. He said that he would never introduce me to member friends and that he never wanted to talk to us again. And I remember reading this letter, and I honestly was just in shock. I didn't understand what was going on. And from that time on, they didn't talk to us. We would stand at the doors and greet, and they would go in the other doors. We had no idea what members they told. We had no idea how far this was going to go. And it was really, really hard. And I'm always someone that's a lot of my confidence has come from what people say about me and how people feel about me. And in that moment, I felt completely, I'd had the rug pulled out from under me. I was there. I was trying, even though I didn't want to be there. This was right after my mission president told me I had to stay, even though I didn't want to. And I was trying, and it wasn't working. And I remember reading, my dad had sent me this journal of all of the letters that my grandparents had written him. My grandma passed away when I was just little, and so I never knew her, but she wrote these beautiful letters. And so I was reading through this journal one day, and my grandma was talking to my dad about tracting, and my dad hated tracting, and I hate tracting, so it's great. But she said, I am sorry that people there can't control their tongues and that they can't be kind to you. But one of the things that I found is that this is a perfect time to test your charity, that this isn't about them, it's about you, and it's about how you respond to it. So she counseled him to look at Moroni 7. It was 48 through 50, I believe, and to see how charitable he could be to those people in that time. And I remember emailing my dad and telling him about it and saying, you know what, I think that was for me. That letter wasn't for you, it was for me. And it's not to say that I am now totally confident and that I don't need people to tell me that I'm great, because I still struggle with that. But I remember it more fully understanding that my efforts were what the Lord wanted, and that the Lord was the only person who mattered in that moment. That if I was doing enough for him, it didn't matter what anybody else thought. And that was something that was compounded as I went on, and that I'm so grateful for now. I learned a lot about the atonement. I have depression and anxiety. It was totally well controlled when I left, and when I was out, I had a really hard time. I got sick. I think we figured out that I kind of stressed myself sick. I would get migraines constantly. There was about a 8-month period where I always had a headache, and sometimes it was a migraine and sometimes it was just a headache. I had to stay in a lot. I had a lot of companions that had a really hard time with that and didn't understand and were kind of mean and thought I was faking it. And it was really hard because I wanted to be there and I wanted to work. And so a little bit into it, I went to see my mission president, and I wanted to go home. I didn't want to have to work with this anymore. I was so frustrated. And he said something to the effect of, I just feel like we should wait. And I remember being so upset. I remember driving away and putting my head on the back seat and I didn't understand. It wasn't working. I don't understand why I have to stay here. And I stayed, and it was one day at a time, and I never felt like all of a sudden I was better. I never felt like, okay, now I can figure out, now I feel better and I'm able to do things. I realized towards the end of my mission that I had learned how to cope with things. That just through trial and error and trying to do my best, I had learned how to cope with, how to cope with being tired, or how to cope with my depression or anxiety or all of these different things that I wouldn't have learned had I had just gone home. And looking back, the summer after I came home, I was an EFY counselor. And when you do EFY, it's Sunday night to Saturday morning. It's about the same time schedule. I had a meeting at like 6:30, and then I had to put my girls to bed at 10:30. And I did it for 7 weeks in a row. And I remember on that 7th week, my body was done. And I got sick. And I woke up and I was like, I can't move. And that helped me. I mean, I understood really what the atonement had done for me. There's no way that I could have done that by myself. And that, I begged, I pleaded for help, and I never felt like I got it, but I didn't realize that it was just being able to go out and work that day. And so I learned a lot about how the Savior really, he loves us, but about how he helps us as well, and how to access the atonement, because I'd never really been close to the Savior. I was really close to Heavenly Father. We were tight. We were best friends, but they always say he's the older brother, and all of the boy figures in my life they couldn't give me the time of day. So I didn't really know how to deal with boys. I didn't really feel close to that, but I learned how to use the atonement, and I learned how to stick through and how really everything is planned. I think about, like, there was a family that I was able to teach. I was able to be there the whole time they were taught and see them baptized. And I think about how much I would have missed if I had missed that. Just all of these experiences that, even though I didn't want to be there, he knew and he was willing to make me stay, even though I didn't want to. In my second area, we got to know this family really well. I had a really hard time. Nobody told me how hard it was to move from your first area to your second area. I had been struggling with depression and anxiety, and I had been transferred right after that, and change is really hard. And so I didn't really get to know a lot of people in this ward, but I got to know this one family really well, because we went over there all the time. And they had 5 kids, and the oldest was a super geek, and it was great because we talked about geeky things. I helped her write a Shakespeare paper once, and it was awesome. They were so great. And I just remember thinking that if I go back and visit anybody from this ward, it's probably going to be them, and that's probably all I'm going to see, because I didn't really know anybody. I was in a trio, and when one of my companions, 2 of us got transferred at the same time, and they had 2 kids with special needs, and one of them just came out and was totally crying when we left. And I love this family. It was so sweet. And then, it must have been about 4 or 5 months later, we were planning one time, and our ward mission leader at the time texted us and said that one of the families in the Old Oaks ward that there was a shooting. And he didn't say who it was, and he didn't really have the story, but he wanted us to know about it, because a lot of the people in our ward knew this. It was a family, but they had grandparents and aunts and uncles all in the area. And I just remember feeling very connected to it, that for some reason it hit me really hard, and I started praying for them. And then we went out to exercise one day, which is kind of a miracle because exercising was not my strong suit, but we went out to this school that was right by the house that we were living in. And we ran into these elders who we never had run into before, and they were out exercising as well. And one of them had served in this ward with me. And he said, "Oh, did you hear about the stays?" And I said, "I didn't hear anything." And he said, "Oh, well, her ex-brother-in-law is all crazy," and went over to their house. And at that point I knew that was the family that had been in that shooting. So what happened is the ex-uncle was looking for his wife and his kids, and came over to the house, and he lined them all up, and he shot them all execution style, and only the oldest daughter survived, the one that I helped out with her project that I was friends with. And so it was a really big thing. It was, the entire area, from what I heard, I didn't see the news, but what I heard, it was making international headlines. And the entire area was just devastated. It was a really hard time, especially because I wasn't in that area anymore. I didn't know how Cassidy was doing. I didn't know how things were working. I didn't know if everybody was okay. And so there was a lot of there was a lot of time that I kind of just spent grieving on my own, and then kind of feeling bad because I didn't feel like I knew them that well, but it was just this weird grieving process. But it was so amazing to see how many conversations came up because of that. They had a memorial after it was like a week after the shooting where Cassidy came out. She had been shot. She showed me later on, but she had put her hands over her head when he started shooting, and the bullet went between her skull and her finger. So she has a scar on her head and she has a scar on her finger, but that's it. And she was able to stay calm long enough. She said that she heard her mom's voice telling her to be quiet, that he left and she pretended that she was dead, and she was able to call the cops and make it so that he wasn't able to go to all of the different houses and all of the different family that he was planning on going to. And so they went to this memorial, and she was totally, she was happy. She was talking about how she was going to see them again. She wasn't completely okay, and you could tell, but she was so overwhelmingly positive. And we had a lot of conversations with people that didn't understand how she could be like that. That didn't understand how she could be so happy because of everything that had happened. And we got to testify a lot about the plan of salvation, and about how she knew that she would see them again, and that it was going to be okay. And I got to go back and visit for a baptism just recently, and we spent a lot of time talking, and it's amazing to see how well she's able to work with everything. We just sat and talked for a long time. She told me everything about that night. She told me everything about everything since then. And about all of the things that had happened. And it's just, it's incredible to see what can happen and what good can come of such a horrific conversation. Another thing that we realized is that this family, the parents were rock stars. They were solid. They kept their covenants. They were so worthy. The two older kids that passed away they both had special needs, and the two younger kids were both younger than 8. So it was one of those things where we know exactly where they are. And so that was a really interesting, but a really amazing experience to go through, even though it was really hard. You're going to get clothes. You're going to have so many clothes. Do not fill your bag. Don't be like, oh, I'm never going to get clothes ever again, because that's a lie. I did a lot of service at thrift shops, and that's just a thing. And when you're sorting things at the thrift shop and you find something that's totally cute and that's really not that expensive and that fits you and makes you look good, you're going to buy it because it's like $2. So you're not going to want for anything. The stipend when I was there is $140 for elders and $150 for sisters every month. So it's not very much, but you're able to take care of yourself. Your shoes are going to get trashed. Just accept that. Get some insoles and some flats and you'll be fine. You can get super bulky, comfy shoes, but a lot of the times I had a pair of flats and some insoles that were completely trashed when I got home, but that were fine. Because unless you're in a biking area, you really don't do that much walking unless you run out of miles on your car. Then you do a lot of walking. If you have humid hair issues, I am sorry for you, because that's a struggle. Oh, and don't cut your hair if you're going in the summer, because you're going to want to put it up in a ponytail. And I didn't think about that. You can cut it short in the winter if you want, as long as it grows out long enough in the summer that you don't have to have it on your neck, because ew, it's so bad. There was one time in my first area, this is where there was a really nice place on one side of the freeway, and then there was the freeway, and then the train tracks, and then there was this place called Tamina that's, it's like the first Freeman settlement in Texas. And so there are a lot of African-American people, and there's just a lot of poverty. And so we had an investigator down there. Her name was Margaret. And it was honestly super humbling to go to her house. It was We would go and talk to her, and we'd sit on the porch because her son's bed was the couch and he was still asleep. And we got invited inside one time. There weren't any doors. It was just kind of sheets in the doorway. And just to see, I mean, they really didn't have very much, but she was such a kind lady. So we had an appointment with her. We were just waiting. We were a little bit early, so we were just sitting in our car. And all of a sudden we heard this, "Hey!" and a whistle. And I turned around, and I'm pretty sure it was adrenaline, but this giant black man was walking toward us. I mean, he was huge and he was bulky, and oh my heavens. So my companion rolled the window down. It was my trainer, so she had to deal with it. She was like, "Hello?" He was like, "What are y'all doing here?" And she was like, we have an appointment down the street." And he was like, "Y'all aren't selling or buying dope, are you?" And we were like, "No, sir, we're not." And he was like, "Well, the kids always park in front of my house to buy dope, and I'm sick of it. I was going to call the cops on you." We were like, No, we're not buying dope. I promise. It's, so I just remember the conversation ended genially, and he was like, "Well, have a nice day," and walked away. My companion was like, "I'm pretty sure I just wet myself. That was so scary." So yeah, that's a crazy experience that is G-rated that I can share. I almost learned how to ride a bike without hands. I didn't, though. My first companion, when we were biking, I was better than she was. And then my next companion got transferred in. She was this daredevil. So she, is riding without hands, going all across the road, like up on the curb. I felt really bad about that. I was very upset. I have lost it a little bit, but I'm trying to get it back. I have gotten very good at saying yes, ma'am, and yes, sir, and no, ma'am, and no, sir, because kids will get smacked if they don't do that. They are always very kind. That was one of my favorite things about being down in the inner city, is that these giant black men with many tattoos and piercings and gold teeth that you thought were the most frightening things in the world would always say yes, ma'am. So, I mean, they were always so very kind. And that's one thing that I loved about, there's definitely an African-American culture down there that I miss so much. I did not get a Texas accent, but I can speak Ebonics. I'm losing it a little bit, but you know that girl. I be talking. And there were people that were just hilarious. They were so fun to talk to. But you kind of get a little bit into that groove, and you're going to miss it if you're from Utah, because there's no black people here. But they were just so kind. But they are very, very polite. I very rarely had anybody that was super rude to me down in that area, which was really interesting. I loved being down in the inner city. I loved talking to people down there. It was hard because a lot of the times we'd go and teach them, and then we'd come back and they'd be totally high, and so we couldn't teach them anymore because they were high. But they were so fun to talk to, and so you kind of get into that groove. So you get the yes ma'am and the yes sirs. The y'alls are fun. People didn't use them a lot around me because, again, I was in the city, but I really wanted those, so I worked on them. They say you have to eat everything. I wasn't very good at that because I hate tomatoes with a fiery, burning passion, and also onions. And so members were not very, they were usually very, if you don't want to eat this, please don't eat it, because they knew. One thing that always really worked for me is take your dishes to the sink after you're done, because there was a member that really liked that and told the mission president, and members always were really impressed. So take your dishes at the sink. There's just funny things like fixin' to. Well, it's not really fixin' to, it's fixin' to. I'm fixin' to do something. And just funny Southern isms that were great. It's just a funny place. There's little quirky things. There's not really anything big, but there's little quirky things you get a lot. So there was this one family that I taught that was so wonderful and so great. So we had just gotten transferred to this area. They had taken this elders out and put the sisters in, and we were looking through their area book, and we found this family that they had taught, and they had started teaching them, and they were open to them having missionaries over, but they had just had a baby, and it was the youngest of 7 kids. So they were like, "Oh, well, just try them back later." So we started teaching this family, and it was amazing. They were so great. But it was also really hard. They always talk about families, and it's amazing to be able to teach a family. But one thing that I didn't even think of is that it's 5 different investigators that may be at 5 different places. So the dad did not talk. We could barely get him to say words. And most of the time it was just nodding or one-word answers, which was really hard to figure out how somebody's testimony is if they're giving you one-word answers. I remember one time he asked my companion and I if we were doing something for the weekend, and we literally stopped for a second because we were so surprised that he had asked us a question, and then we were like, oh, we're not doing anything. We're just being missionaries for the weekend. It was great. But I remember we'd been teaching them for a while. They had gone through all of the lessons, and we felt like they needed to be baptized, but we still didn't know what page this dad was on. The son had been going to church and going to activities. The family had been going to church, but because he never said anything, we really had no idea where they were supposed to be. So I remember we were planning this baptism, and we just sat there and we were like, I don't know if we can set a date, because what if they're not ready by this date? What if, they haven't gone to church enough times because they have to go these times in order to go? And my companion and I just said, you know what? I think she said it. And she said, you know what? We just have to let it go. We just have to trust that we're going to set this goal and Heavenly Father's going to make it happen. And if it's not supposed to happen, it's not going to happen. So we set this date and we said, this is when it's going to happen and it's going to be great. So we did their interviews. We called the mission president in to help us do interviews because we had no idea how to read this guy. Actually, we asked him about it. He was like, well, I'll come and do it, because he's just like that. And he's great. And he said, yep, they're ready to go. And so they were baptized. And they, I got transferred right after that, but they were able to go to the temple. My companion said that when they received the priesthood, that they ordained the dad, and he turned right around and ordained his sons, which was totally, it's so cool. They got transferred. That's a missionary thing. They moved up to Illinois, and the dad is now in the young men's presidency, and just all these different things that I never would have expected. And that was a lesson to me, because I worry so much. It's what if I don't get this to happen? What if this doesn't happen? And it was really cool when I came home, because it translated really well. Some things are hard to translate into real life, but I just remember, I was trying to get a shift covered at work, which normally, it's such a little thing, but normally would have stressed me out. But because of that learning to just be okay and know that it's all going to work out, I was able to be totally okay with it. And it's really cool. I love that. It's like one of my favorite things. I just want to say congratulations. And you just got called to the best mission in the whole entire world. Everybody else says that, but you really did. I got a lot of pieces of advice. I got so much of you should do this, and you should do this, and you should do this. And it was really hard to keep track of everything. But the one thing that I would ask you to do is first I would ask you to write in your journal. I have a record of every day. I didn't write every day because sometimes I got really behind, and that happens. But I honestly don't think I would have learned as much on my mission if I hadn't written it down. It's kind of like living through it again. And you know what? I also would advise you just enjoy it, and enjoy where you are. I remember thinking for some reason that I was going to go to be a missionary, and I would have a couple of struggles, and then the rest of them would be with investigators, that I would be this perfect missionary. And, it's this horrific truth that you'll get it figured out, and then they'll make you go home right after that. It's really mean. But just enjoy where you are. Enjoy being a beginner. Enjoy relying on your trainer and learning from them. Enjoy your next couple of transfers. Enjoy being at 6 months, because nobody thinks it's a big deal, but for you, it's a really big deal. And just look to have fun. I think I stressed out so much, and I was trying so hard, and I never felt like I was measuring up. And I think that took away a lot of the joy out of missionary work. So write in your journal, have fun, and just, you're going to do it anyway, but this is such an amazing time to learn and to rely on the Lord. So make sure to take advantage of that. And you are going to be amazing. I know you are. This will change the course of your life, and you won't understand how much it will change the course of your life at all. I thought about the things that would change. I thought about what I would learn. And one of my cousins told me, you'll never know the fruits of your labors in this life because they're too many. And I kind of thought that, but I've come to see how much I was able to do because of what the Lord asked me to do. I know that you have the strength and energy to do this, but you're only going to have the strength and energy to do this when you trust the Lord. You know what? He has a plan for you. He knows exactly how your mission is going to go. He has lessons he wants you to learn and people he wants you to meet. Just trust him and have fun, and it's going to be awesome. I love it.